over a year in, we're all feeling it. Zoom fatigue. Clinical psychologist Dr. Maneet Bhatia joining us on Canada Now. And Dr. Bhatia, notice that you're joining us on the show. We're not using Zoom. We're using the phone because we're just we're sick of staring at screens, aren't we?
I appreciate the phone call, believe me.
Well, we spend more time than we used to in sitting in front of our computers in meeting after meeting and in working in between. And yes, there are aches and pains in the back, neck, and shoulders and wrists that we're experiencing at our makeshift home offices. And we talked about that earlier in the show, Dr. Bhatia. But let's look at the mental aspect of it all. How much of an effect is constant close-up eye contact having on us?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, do you have any tips for physical pain? I got tennis elbow, and I have to get my glasses rechecked, so I'm having a lot of issues too physically. So let me know if you know anyone for that. But no, it's absolutely the entire body is being impacted. You just indicated a lot of physical things, which everyone can relate to, including myself. But you raised a really important piece about the mental, psychological aspect, and you mentioned close-up eye contact. And one of the things with some interesting data coming out from studying mental exhaustion caused by Zoom fatigue is around the idea of staring at a screen in such close distance and keeping really intense kind of prolonged eye contact is not really normal if you think about in-person communication, right? It's the duration's longer, you're closer, you're really trying to focus. So what happens is it keeps us in almost a hyper-aroused state because we're constantly, intensely trying to keep our gaze. So it keeps us, under the surface mentally and cognitively like the engine is running, so to speak, which leads to kind of burnout and it leads to exhaustion. So that's one of the big challenges is the unnatural, the tendency that we're dealing with, which is close contact for extended periods of time, whether it's one meeting or a slew of meetings in a day. It's too much for too long.
Yeah. And we're also looking constantly for visual cues from other attendees in a Zoom meeting. It's exhausting. It's not just that we're maintaining eye contact and maybe being a little self-conscious of what we look like and what is around us, but also is looking at all the people that are in the meeting. And if you're the one doing the talking, you're looking to see how everybody is reacting to what you would normally say. And it's different when you're in a board meeting and standing in front of everybody because it feels like you can see everybody in one glance, but it's just different when it's on Zoom and everybody's in different boxes.
No, absolutely. It's the idea of, like you said, trying to navigate, who's looking at me and how am I presenting myself. So there's a whole self-focus piece, but even just the important part about the visual cues, right? You're trying to read people's nonverbals and their facial reactions. And that could be skewed by, where their box is, their tile is on your screen and how their camera is positioned. So you're trying really hard to decipher and read. This is happening all automatically. We're not consciously doing this, but again, subconsciously trying to pay attention to everyone else's nonverbals and also how we're coming across, right? Like, am I communicating my attention properly? Am I, demonstrating, in my line of work, am I demonstrating the appropriate empathy? Can my patient hear what I'm trying to say, nonverbally? And it happens at board meetings. Am I getting their attention? So the energy you exert, again, these things are much more natural in person. Like you mentioned, the boardroom example, you have their attention looking at you, and whether they're looking at you or rather paying attention to you, you may not know that in a boardroom, but you don't see it so blatantly on a tile, right? So it's kind of like you can kind of even not be aware of it. So again, it creates this hyper focus, this kind of overdrive of working, and it's fatiguing,
Yeah, I get tired of seeing myself for prolonged amounts of time. Normally at work, that wouldn't happen. You wouldn't be seeing yourself for as long. And, for those that might be very bothersome and being very self-conscious.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of this. A lot of what's coming out now is some of the strategies to deal with this fatigue is to take off the self-viewing option, the self-focus. And what that does is we know from a lot of research that when we see ourselves, it could trigger in all of us a bit more anxiety, a bit more being self-conscious. Again, you don't feel like you can be yourself. You're trying to make sure, am I looking right? Am I sitting properly? Am I in the proper view? It can create a lot of heightened self-reflection, which can, in some people can, it's just uncomfortable. It doesn't make them feel like it's a natural thing. I mean, you're looking at yourself, talking to somebody else. But those of us also who kind of struggle, wearing my mental health lens, like those of us who are, maybe a little more anxious, a little more self-critical or self-conscious, and struggle with maybe esteem issues, that can also be triggered, right? While you're trying to do your job, while you're trying to earn a living, you're trying to cope with these kind of uncertainties that exist under the surface, so to speak.
Yeah. And there's no change of environment. Like, we're staying in one spot for way too long. Like, we can't move from room to room, have spontaneous meetings in different places at different desks as well. Sometimes you might be headed towards a boardroom and you might be a few minutes early, but you might see a coworker, run into a coworker, and just have a chat that's not planned. Because that's the thing too. Like, we're planning every one of our conversations right now, and that can be quite taxing because I wanted to bring something up with you. Okay, let's set up a meeting, let's text, it's just everything is so planned, and there's no spontaneity and there's no change in environment.
Absolutely, bang on. And it's one of those things where, like you said, everything's micromanaged, right? And the ability to get up and walk around, or like you said, you walk by the water cooler and say, "Hey, can you believe how that Raptors game went last night?" or whatever. And you chat about something different, and it's just this idea of like everything being micromanaged, and we're losing that sense of, you mentioned, spontaneity. And I think tied to that is a loss of human connection. It's interesting, when this pandemic started, a lot of us were like, "Oh, it's great. I can get up, I can roll out of bed, and I can go to work, and all this." And now we're hearing, like, even when it comes to, like, obviously people are like, "I want to go back to the office. Perhaps a hybrid model. I can go in a couple of days a week and then work from home sometimes." Even other things I'm hearing, talking to, colleagues or friends, or like even personal trainers saying, all my clients want to do virtual or video. Now they're desperate to come back to the gym. I mean, everywhere we turn, there's this real longing for this sense of spontaneity and human connection that's not behind a screen. So I think we need to, be very mindful of that and find ways to break up our days and to break up our this monotony, so to speak. But again, it raises the other point of, even though we're breaking it up, which we need to, is important, there's still something that will, I think, frankly, be lost until we can go back to that, whatever that normal looks like, where there's a spontaneity with it again.
Yeah, and I really do miss a connection with coworkers that, again, are not planned. Like, you talk about, just talking about last night's Raptors game or something. Like, you lose that connection with coworkers that, again, have to be planned. Like, my wife manages a team where she works, and she sets aside time in her day to just have like 10 or 15 minutes. And again, she has to plan them with those that she works with, or those that are on her staff, to just talk. And it doesn't have to be about anything, really. Just, "Hey, how's it going? Did you get your hair cut yesterday? You said you were going to," like that sort of thing. And she has to plan time to do that, because she feels like connections have been lost that would have just been gained without any planning.
No, absolutely. And I think it's not ideally what it used to be, but what you just described there and what your wife is doing is something that I recommend to, my patients and people I speak to, is what she's trying to do is to recreate those water cooler moments, right? Just like to have some time to communicate and connect. And yes, it still comes with as we've been discussing, the burden or the emotional fatigue of the mental fatigue rather, of having to plan these things. But it's important that there's a conscious awareness going on and a planning going on to say, okay, we need to set up time just to try to be. I know it's kind of paradoxical, right? You got to create the spontaneity in a sense, but I think that's still better than, what a lot of us rather are falling into, which is this kind of like 7 hours straight or whatever it is, sitting in front of a desk, not getting up for a break, not having conversations outside of whatever your projects, your work, your tasks, your deadlines are. and it wreaks havoc on us. So I think, I've been trying to implement with my patients, water cooler moments, in their days, and going for a walk to break it out. If you can take, instead of doing a Zoom video call, can you do an audio call? Is a video required? And if you can do audio and it's more not a formal presentation type thing, can you do it while you're going for a walk? Trying to find ways to integrate different components into this lifestyle that we're kind of confined to right now, given the pandemic. But to find ways to make choices of when and how to use video and how to be creative to find ways to connect.
Absolutely. Got to do it. Clinical psychologist Dr. Maneet Bhatia. Great to talk to you again, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us and appreciate the advice.
Yeah, always love being on with you, Jeff. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maneet Bhatia. Love having him on.